like to welcome Dan to our copyright clinic, who's a bit of an expert in what to do and what not to do, and he's going to share his extensive research with us today and answer questions. I'm quite sure he won't have the answer to everything, but he'll try his best as far as he's able to do that. So Dan, I'm just going to go straight over to you, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy. Yeah, so just by way of a brief introduction, I am, as Joy implied, I have no qualifications or anything in copyright. All of my knowledge has stemmed from research, particularly over the past 18 months, but indeed before that as well, on copyright. I do lots of other things as well, and it's through my role as a media for ministry consultant. So I work with churches, synods and faith-based organizations on how they could use media, particularly digital media, to enhance their ministry and mission. So that takes me to building websites, social media training on Zoom. That's taking place on Zoom, so training on Zoom, and all sorts of other things as well, sound systems, live streaming, yeah, lots of bits and bobs, and copyright. So yeah, I would like to start really by saying that my only and it's not by any qualification that I'm here, but done lots of research, and because I'm paid by Yorkshire Synod to help Yorkshire Synod churches navigate, particularly the last 18 months, then you won't. That's the reason I've been able to spend so much time on this. So don't be hard on yourselves if you don't understand it yet. Hopefully by the end of this session, you will have much more of a grasp on it. And indeed, as Joy said, I don't have the answer to every question, but what I will hopefully be able to impart with you today are some principles and some fundamentals that will hopefully enable you to answer your own questions. And so that's why it was almost quite surprising the other sessions I've run when there were no questions, because people actually got given the information to answer the questions for themselves. So, and because a lot of what I'm going to go through today applies to every single piece of work that is copyrighted. So, you know, I'm not going to be talking about particular every single element of it, but lots of fundamentals, hopefully that will help you. So in terms of questions, obviously there will be time for questions at the end. Ultimately, if you either don't want your question to be asked today or out loud, or you just want to ask it later, or we don't have time or whatever, then, you know, feel free to drop Joy an email and she'll be able to forward it on. Do feel free to just pop it in the chat as well, into either private chat or out loud, so to speak, on the public chat, and we'll come to it at the end. But obviously, your question may well be answered by the end anyway. So if we can just try and keep questions to the end, then that would be great. So for those of you who are around towards the beginning of the Zoom meeting, I'd said we were planning for about 45 minutes to an hour probably of input from me, and then plenty of time afterwards for questions. And then we will take a break at some point in that, depends how long everything goes, but we will take a break, so don't worry too much. So just to set the scene really, copyright has been in our lives since the existence of the first thing that somebody wrote. Copyright has not come into existence in the past 18 months. And that's one of the things I want to drill in really, is that copyright is not just a thing because we're doing lots of things online now. And also copyright will still be a thing even if you stop doing things online. So, you know, do bear that in mind. And this is not for me to say, oh, well, you should have been doing a lot better before COVID. You know, I'm not here to tell you off or anything, because ultimately I don't gain anything from that. But it's just to let you know that copyright has been a thing, is a thing, and will be a thing before, during, and after the pandemic. So, for example, if your church decides to stop Zooming, decides to stop doing stuff online, then you will need still licenses and all that kind of stuff, which most of you will have had, I'm sure. But you do need to pay due diligence to copyright. And so everything I'm going to be telling you today, folks, is fact. This is what is written somewhere usually on the internet somewhere. And so I'm just imparting these facts onto you. There is none of my opinion, because ultimately I'm sure our opinions on copyright will be slightly different from the reality of copyright. There is stuff that we can get away with, but just because we can get away with it doesn't mean we should get away with it. Because one of the first things I want to say about copyright is it's there for a reason, folks. It's not here to catch us out. It's not here so that these large businesses can make loads of money. It's there and it exists to give due credit and indeed sometimes due money to people who create stuff, whether that be music, words, poems, whatever it might be. Whoever takes a picture, all those kinds of things. And so it's really important that we do give credit, and whether that means giving credit as in just saying this photo was taken by such and such, which is not necessarily giving enough credit to the person. Just because you give credit to them doesn't mean you're exempt from copyright. You know, it is really important that we follow the processes to ensure that people receive the right amount of credit, the right amount of respect for the things that they are producing, and so that they can continue to produce them as well. Because if they don't make enough money off it, or they're not getting enough credit for it, then they're just going to stop producing, and then that's no fun for anyone. So it's that there's a reason that copyright exists. I'm full of a cold today, folks, so I might have to mute every time I need to cough, so I don't scare you all. So a couple of overall principles of copyright. And these are, if you're going to take anything away from today, then it's going to be these things, which actually means after I've done this bit, you could leave if you wanted to. The first one, if there's any doubt, there is no doubt. What do I mean by that? Well, if there's any doubt about what you've obtained, this piece of work that you've obtained, where you've obtained it from, or the legitimacy of what you're doing, if there's any doubt about that, then there is no doubt that you need to do something about that. You need to either find where it's come from properly, or there's no doubt that you shouldn't be using it either. So if there's any doubt, there's no doubt. And unfortunately, there's not much interaction in today's session, but this is the one piece of interaction I'm going to allow. I wonder if anyone can tell me what the easiest way of avoiding a copyright infringement is. There are some easy ways, but the easiest way.
Use your own stuff.
That's a good one, Addy. Yeah. Roberta, you're going to say?
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Just use your own
stuff. Well, we'll go for joint easiest then, because it's either use your own stuff or B, don't use it. And so that links in with if there's any doubt, there's no doubt. It's the sad reality, folks. Yeah, if you use your own stuff, then of course you're all good. And if you're in any doubt about whether you should be or could be using something, then unfortunately the safest thing to do is not to use it. So that's how we can avoid it, guaranteed. And unfortunately, that can sometimes be a hard decision to make. Because we might have found a really good picture, really good video, really good piece of music. And we might have to, unfortunately, say no to that because of copyright issues. But again, I just want to remind us why copyright exists. So we're doing them a favor by giving them the due credit they deserve. But on the other hand, don't think you're doing them a favor by just giving them credit for what they're doing, because people have to make, most people, Stuart Townend, for example, all these hymn writers, you know, they have to make money somehow. And that, strangely enough, that is their job. And so if they can't make money from that, then they won't be able to continue producing more music and things. And so just by giving them credit for their work does not exempt you from copyright, folks. And a final principle is check, check, check. always check. Either checking with the relevant licensing agency, which we'll come on to later, or indeed the best way is to be able to check with the copyright owner themselves. So the person who took the photo, the person who produced the piece of music. Now, of course, that's not always possible. One reason might be that they're dead. That's pretty impossible. Or the second reason could be that it's somebody so big that you're not going to be able to get in touch with them. And so that's why licensing agencies exist, like CCLI, like One License, that we're going to come on to later. So that's why they exist. And of course, they also exist so that we don't have to contact every single owner of all the hymns that we're using on a Sunday, for example. We will hopefully be able to just contact CCLI or use CCLI as our agency, and that will cover us for those hymns. So, but ultimately, another really good way of avoiding copyright is to speak to the owner themselves. And if they say yes, then, happy days. So that's why licensing agencies exist, to make it not so difficult to work out. So usually when most people think about copyright, they're actually not thinking about all copyrighted works. They're usually just thinking about music and hymns. And so that's kind of the main thing I'm going to be talking about today, because it is the main sticking point for copyright. But I'd like to emphasize that copyright applies to everything else too. So a piece of a photo that somebody takes, a video that they've produced, all those kinds of things, everything that has ever been produced has some form of copyright to it. Whether someone wants to do something about that, through an agency or whatever, that's totally up to them. But when we're thinking about music, there are three elements. Like any good sermon, there's 3 points to this, 3 points to any piece of music. The first one is the tune. The second one is the words. And the third is the performance. And the first two are separate because, of course, as we know, we can have many different words set to the same tune. We can have many different tunes set to the same words. So it is important to think about those separately and not just assume that because we've got these words in this hymn that we're all sorted. Because particularly, as time moves on, people will write new words or write new tunes, or indeed perhaps alter the words of a previous set of words. So it is important that we do consider those separately. And then the third one, the performance, that's probably the easiest thing to do on our average week in church, because getting copyright permission, so to speak, from the performer, if the performer is our organist, our pianist, they probably, well, some might want to call themselves performers, but when we're talking about those people, the permission is either implied or it's quite obvious that there's no problems there. But when we're thinking about kind of getting a piece of music from elsewhere that's being performed by someone else, then that performance we need to gain permission for using or arrange that the copyright's okay for that. Because that is a third element to our hymn. But your pianist playing it in church, you don't need to worry about the performance, but then you do need to worry still about the words and the tune. And of course, again, if somebody has recorded a piece of music for you, and they saying please use this recording, then again we're okay for the performance. So it's always good, even if you are in church all the time using your organist or pianist or whatever, it's still good practice to think of every piece of music as those three elements. It's a good principle to go with. The rules around lyrics and tune are exactly the same. They're no different in that sense. But again, as I say, just remember that they are different. And the first thing I want to mention about those bits, because performance isn't a problem in this sense at the moment, is public domain. You may have heard this phrase before, and it basically means that in most cases, after 70 years after the death of an artist, and I mean artist in the broadest sense there, that piece of work has no copyright attributed to it. That usually, so whether it be the words or a tune, or indeed both together, then that is out of copyright. So there is no need to gain permission for using that. There is no need to there's no licensing agency for that, because there's no copyright associated with that work anymore. There are cases when sometimes copyright gets where a piece of work gets brought back into copyright. Those are quite rare, but they do happen. So again, we're just going back to the same principles, folks. Check, check, check. And if there's any doubt, then there's no doubt. So ultimately, you shouldn't need to be any more caught out than before, as long as you use those principles. And also be aware of rearrangements of hymns. That rearrangement is also then going to be attributed to someone. So the tune could be, more than 70 years gone, more than 70 years after the artist has died. So that's out of copyright, that's in the public domain. But then someone rearranges the tune, or adds loads of twiddly bits to it, then that is back in copyright, because it's then owned by that new person. For example, and I know we've got some Methodists in the room, so that's helpful. Singing the Faith, for example, there's lots of traditional hymns in Singing the Faith that have been rearranged, or at least had some twiddly bits added to them, usually by some guy called Paul Leddington Wright. I love Singing the Faith otherwise, apart from that bit. Even though the original tune might be in the public domain, if it's been rewritten or rearranged or had some twiddly bits added to it by somebody, then that is back in copyright. So you need to address that, basically. So again, if you just apply the principles, check, check, check. If there's any doubt, there's no doubt, then you won't have a problem. But do just be aware of those things. And as I implied before, always be aware of using a different tune from normal. I get thrown every single time I lead worship in a different church when they play a completely different tune to the one that I expected. I won't say how that makes me feel, but you do need to make sure you're covered in all those respects. So do just be aware of that. Usually it's going to be covered by the same agency, same licensing agency anyway, so you'll be okay, but not always. So check, check, check. So the main licensing agencies, I've used that phrase a couple of times already, that I want to talk about are CCLI and One License. One License, for those of you who are unaware of One License, used to be called Calamus. I think they merged with another company or something, but you might be familiar with Calamus. Calamus are now One License. But I'm mainly going to talk about CCLI because they are by far the largest agency that we are concerned with. Most churches, if not all, will have some varying CCLI licenses. So that's the main people I'm going to be talking about. CCLI also offer as well as the kind of bog standard licenses to be able to show, words on a screen, to be able to use word, print them, and all those kinds of things. They also offer a streaming license. So for those of you who are Zooming services, who are putting services on YouTube or Facebook, then what the streaming license will essentially enable you to do is to display lyrics, so display the words to those hymns, and use your own performances, guaranteed, of course, because we're okay for those performances, or performances that permit for which permission has been given. So we know that's also okay. we can put those hymns, those songs on our live stream or on Zoom or whatever. But bearing in mind, again, these are only for songs that are covered by CCLI. That's a lot of songs, yeah, but again, do just make sure, don't just assume that because you've got a CCLI license that you're covered for every single Christian song in the world, because you are absolutely not. So as I say, Facebook, YouTube, Zoom, those are the key ones. I don't really, the other place you might be thinking of is, well, we put our stream directly, and this is only directly, onto our church website. Basically, folks, you'll need a different license for that. It's called a limited online music license. But the way you can go around that, if you don't want to buy a limited online music license, is just stream to YouTube. It's so much easier anyway. So, you know, do that instead, basically, or just have a chat with me afterwards. Some of you may be thinking, and I get this question quite a lot, of we have our Zoom services. The Zoom link is only sent out to our church members, so it's kind of like a little private Zoom, which for starters, folks, you know, I don't think that's what church was set up for. But secondly, does that make us free from copyright? No, folks. And you may also be thinking, well, would anyone know? No, probably not. But ultimately, what's copyright for? Let's remind ourselves again, is so that we can give people due credit and due, you know, appreciation for the work that they've done. So whether you can get away with it or not, you know, it is still the same principles for even if you're having a Zoom service between your congregation members. Recently, CCLI have released a streaming license plus, probably in the last couple of months or so. And this streaming license plus also covers the use of CDs, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and from what I've read from terms and conditions and stuff, and that it also Spotify as well. But again, only songs covered by CCLI already. So again, remember that. And if you want to know what songs are covered by CCLI, then there is a way you can do that. You go onto CCLI's website. Well, there's a couple of places you can actually go. Let me just drag one of them up. So CCLI, the way they actually work is they work with publishing agencies, and in turn those publishing agencies work with individual artists. So the link that I've just put in the chat, and again we can make this available afterwards, is an authorized list of publishers that they cover. And then if an artist works with that particular publisher, then that artist is covered. That's one place you can look at it. And that also means that you know that, say, and I'm pretty sure he is anyway, but for example, if Stuart Townend works with this particular publisher and that publisher works with CCLI, then all of Stuart Townend's works are covered. That's the principle of how it works. The other place you can go on the CCLI website is what they call, well, it's called Song Select. And that's another service as well that CCLI offer that I'm not going to talk about today. It's nothing to do with copyright anyway. But if you go onto that part of their website, you need to log in with your church's CCLI details. You can basically search for songs that CCLI cover. So you just type in the name of the hymn or whatever, and it will come up with the copyright details. And that's also useful for getting said copyright details to display on your PowerPoints or on your printed sheets or whatever. So that's another good place to go to check. And again, similar to, so when we're still talking about online here or hybrid, and again, online and hybrid are treated the same. So you need a streaming license, even if you're worshipping in the building, but then streaming that out. You still report your music, your songs in the same way that you should be doing already every year to CCLI. You should still be, again, displaying the CCLI license at the end of your PowerPoints, or put it in your video descriptions on YouTube, those kinds of things. As far as I'm aware, the best practice certainly is to put it at the end of every hymn you use. And I would just pop it in your video description if you live stream on YouTube and things like that, just in case. But ultimately, you're covered if you've got the right CCLI license. The last time I checked, which wasn't too long ago, maybe about 2 weeks ago, one license, as I say, was formerly Calamus. They also have a streaming license, which, as far as I can see, enables you to do the same as what I just said CCLI does. So that enables you to display lyrics and to use your own performances or performances people have given permission for. Enables you to use those on a live stream, so Zoom, Facebook, YouTube. And for those of you who don't know, Calamus or One License cover things like the Iona community's work, Taizé community, and for some reason, Let Us Build a House Where Love Can Dwell as well. So those are things to look out for. Completely random, you wouldn't know why, but it just does. So this is why those principles of check, check, check are really important, because you assume, yeah, One License, that covers Taizé, and I don't use any others. You could get caught out, so do be aware. So copyright in the sense of music we've looked at now, and we're kind of moving on to the next most frequently asked question on copyright, and that is, can I use a YouTube video? That is probably to be honest, the biggest question I get asked. And especially in the past 18 months, when we've not been able to sing, or certainly for the start of it, weren't able to sing, then having someone else to sing for you was really helpful. So YouTube videos was a big question, and unfortunately, there is no one right answer with YouTube videos. There isn't a licensing agency you can get in touch with that will give you permission to use all videos on YouTube or anything like that. Unfortunately, it's a bit more of a grey area. And there's a few good, very, very good reasons for that. The first is that there's lots of things on YouTube that shouldn't be on YouTube. YouTube has uploaded to it about 500 hours of video every minute. 500 hours every minute. Obviously it's a global thing, and people put all sorts of stuff on YouTube. There's so much stuff on there that shouldn't be on there, for copyright reasons. Because I can upload a video that is very copyrighted, that shouldn't be uploading it, and YouTube will probably let me keep it on, or that it will take them a long time until they make me take it off or take it off for me. And so that means that we could be using a YouTube video or a video that we shouldn't be using. So I could record a 5-minute section of BBC Songs of Praise. I could plonk it onto YouTube, and they pretty much wouldn't bat an eyelid. But we can quite obviously see that that's not something that we wouldn't do that. So then why would we use a video that where someone has done that? So unfortunately, those kinds of things we need to be really careful with. And so we need to be careful about what the video is, but we also need to be careful about who's uploaded it as well. There are ways that we can use YouTube videos, and I'm gonna outline that now. So YouTube is, we know it's free, right? That's okay, but it's free. And this is why I've spent so much time on it. If you read the terms and conditions of YouTube, it's free for personal use, for one person, you know, sat around your computer to watch it. It's not free to then be broadcast or shown to all other people, at least not without any further, you know, conversations or repercussions or whatever. So when it comes to playing a YouTube video in church, you need to get permission from that YouTube channel owner to use that video. And again, this is when the first thing I said is quite key, because if I've illegally uploaded a 5-minute clip of songs of praise onto YouTube, and Anytown URC has contacted me to say, can we use your video? I could say yes, but what does that mean? Because I've uploaded it illegally anyway. So do be aware of that. And unfortunately, as I say, there's no one right answer. You just have to be aware and be careful of the YouTube channels that you're visiting and using. And yeah, usually if you get in touch with them, they will probably, if they reply, then they're probably legitimate. But you know, one thing to look out for is what they call it's a verified channel. So next to their name, they will have a blue tick next to it, say, you know, the BBC themselves. Then, you know, that is a verified channel. But you must get permission from the YouTube channel owner to use that video. And then, of course, usually that video is just covering the performance. Let's say it's on Songs of Praise. You've got permission from BBC Songs of Praise to use their performance of that song. That's only one of our three-legged stool, isn't it? We've got permission for the performance, but we still need, not permission, but we still need to address the other two elements, the lyrics and the tune. If they're covered by CCLI, then of course that's absolutely fine. But again, just remember those three legs to the stool. And of course, you know, it's always worth saying in those kinds of contacts with people that, you know, this is where we want to use it. We want to use it in this worship service or whatever. We've got a CCLI license, so we're covered in that respect. You know, all those things will help that YouTube channel owner want to say yes back to you, because they could say no. And that's happened plenty of times with me. I wanted to do a reflection last year for my church in Leeds. I wanted to read a chapter from a book called Diary of a Disciple, which is from Scripture Union. I got in touch with Scripture Union and said, can I use a chapter? It wasn't even a chapter. Can I read, you know, 5 pages from your book on this reflection on Facebook? And they said no. So, you know, do be aware, folks. And so obviously if I wouldn't have asked permission, then, you know, I would have been in murky waters. So we've got that holy trinity. We've got lyrics, tune, performance. And of course, there's lots more to YouTube than just music as well, but the same principles apply. So a video that's, you know, describing a Bible story or whatever, you know, those things you will also need to gain permission from. And so basically, folks, the assumption often is, well, if YouTube's free for me, then surely it's free to use in church. Unfortunately not. That's the main message to take away. One of the main other things that's uploaded to YouTube are film clips. Again, 9 times out of 10, folks, these have been illegally uploaded anyway. So you can almost guarantee that you won't be able to use those. So again, even if you gain permission from the channel to use it, they won't have had permission in the first place. So unfortunately not. Moving on to a different type of music that I usually just easily term, it's not the term I like to use, but it's the easiest way to cover it all, is secular music, stuff that's not hymns, basically. Because I've wanted and tried and succeeded in using that in worship services, in other settings. unfortunately, there isn't, I mean, certainly CCLI don't cover it. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just saying, oh, well, because we've got this license that we can use all secular music, because ultimately that's a much broader range than just the hymns and songs we use on our average Sunday. If that's something you do a lot, or something you want to explore doing a lot of, then I'd recommend getting in touch with PRS for Music, who are kind of the overarching agency for most secular music, and certainly deal a lot in that sphere. I haven't spoken to them much about it, but they are certainly the people to get in touch with if that's something you are going to use a lot. Of course, another way of going about it is to contact the owner of the copyright. And again, pretty much all songs will be covered by a publisher, so they publish the songs. So I don't think you have to get in touch with Stormzy or Mumford & Sons directly. You don't need their direct line. You just need to get in touch with the publisher. And their job, they get paid to answer these kinds of queries. So don't feel like you're doing, you're annoying them or anything. Maybe you are, but who cares? Do get in touch with them. That's what they're there for. So get in touch with the publishers. I talked earlier about public domain, and obviously we've talked about stuff that's in copyright as well. There's sort of a middle ground, which you might be relieved to hear. It's called Creative Commons. And Creative Commons is, as I say, this kind of middle ground where an artist has, of course, the work's still in copyright, but the artist has said, you know what, I think I'm going to benefit from letting this be freely used. That's usually their thinking behind it. So they've said people can use it. They will usually say, make sure you credit me at the end, or all those kinds of things. But they've basically said my work is still in copyright. It's certainly, I'm still alive, so it's not 70 years after I've died. But I want some recognition. I want some publicity. I want my work to be seen. Maybe they're just starting out, or maybe they've, whatever situation. Anyway, they are. That's basically what Creative Commons is when they've said you can use my work. Just make sure you give me some credit. So that's something else you can look out for, and that's particularly prevalent in kind of non-music sectors. Poetry, probably some prose as well, I would think, and yeah, photos, video clips, etc. So that can be a really huge benefit, and there are lots of websites and stuff that have just loads of Creative Commons stuff on, so do just Google it. I'll be going through some other sources of free stuff in a bit, but yeah, as I say, Creative Commons is that middle ground, really. In terms of other media, then there's no licensing agency for things like images. Again, there's no coverall, because there just isn't. So again, if you find an image, then you'll need to obtain permission for that image. And again, folks, obtaining a photo from Google Images doesn't mean that it's free. Google pulls Google takes a website, it sieves out the words, and it catches the images and it plonks them onto Google Images. That's all it does. Google doesn't pick up the free ones and put it on Google Images. So just because you found it on Google Images doesn't mean it's okay to use. So don't just assume. But you could click on the image, you can find the website that it's from, get in touch with the person that's on that website. as I say, I'm going to go through some free sources of images shortly anyway. So you would probably do that if you had this image that you really, really, really wanted, because you're then going to go to the effort of getting in touch. But as I say, there's some free sites for like stock images. So also be aware of things like pictures, photographs of artwork. So artwork, a lot of artwork is of course in the public domain because it's old. But if someone takes a picture of that and you know, they've taken a really good picture of it as well. Although the art's in the public domain, the photo of the art isn't. So be aware of things like that as well. So again, if we just apply the same principles, check, and if there's any doubt, there's no doubt, then we won't have a problem. There is one other website, as I say, there still isn't a coverall, but there is a good website you can go on to that shows a lot of sources and publishers of basically text stuff, prose, poetry, etc., which I've just popped in the chat there. And it shows you the copyright holders associated with loads of pieces of work, or the publishers or whatever. So again, you can get in touch with the publisher and they will be able to help you out there. Or indeed it'll say, well, actually it's more than 70 years since this person died, so you know it's in the public domain. Those kinds of things are helpful to know. So onto free sources of information, well, free sources of media really. The main ones I'm going to point out to you now are mainly for images, but also for video clips as well. And so these are what we call stock images. So they're kind of, you know, a picture of a lake, you know, quite not vague, but sort of a kind of descriptive image. So you'd be hard pressed to find a very kind of niche image, but there are some really, really good photos out there that will help, you know, illustrate a sermon or put on the front cover of your magazine, those kinds of things. And all of these websites that I'm just going to pop into the chat again and again, as I say, we'll make them available afterwards. So Unsplash is images only, but there's some really, really good images on there. Pixabay also has video clips, and so again, we're talking stock videos, so of a rushing, babbling brook or whatever, you know, those kinds of things. And they have some music clips as well. Pexels is also has videos. And then finally, there we go. Finally, there's Freely Photos as well, which is a really, really good one because they're kind of Christian-based images. And so they actually theme them as well into particular either parts of the church calendar or, you know, here's loads of pictures of Bibles, you know, those kinds of things. So there's some really useful stuff in there. Other places for music, there's one. Here we go, just paste that in. So smallchurchmusic.com, and it says in big letters on the front of the website, all of these songs are in the public domain and the performer has given permission for the performance to be used. So there's our Holy Trinity there, all sorted. So that you can use any of those on there without, if you didn't have one, a CCLI license. There's also the YouTube audio library, which I've just put in text because actually you need a YouTube channel to be able to, or a YouTube account to be able to access it. But if you just Google it, it will take you through the process of doing that. On there, they have kind of they have sound effects as well. So I've sometimes jazzed up a few sermons with some sound effects. Or they also have kind of, just stock music, background music kind of thing. So if I'm perhaps editing a video, producing a video, I would go to the YouTube audio library to put some music, get some music to put over the top. There's also some stock music on bensound.com, as well as here we are. So these are all free so far, but there's also this one here, which is Worshiplyricvideos.com, and this is where you can buy basically their videos of the lyrics of a particular song, and again, the permission, by buying it, you know, you've essentially got that permission to use the song performance, but then of course you need to make sure you're covered for the song itself, for the lyrics and the tune. And then there's also, here you go, there's also timeforworship.com, which again is similar to small church music. So all the hymns that are used are in the public domain. So you can use them in any setting and any context. There are undoubtedly more, and indeed, if you know of any more, then please do let us all know now, or let me know, because then more people will benefit from them in the future. Because yeah, they will. I mean, they'll come and go, but more will be made aware of, hopefully. So yeah, please do just share them if you know them. A couple of things to finish off with. The first thing I want to draw people's attention to is the URC's own getting to grips with copyright booklet, which is on the URC website. Again, they talk through a lot of the fundamentals of copyright. Some of the information's a little bit outdated as it was produced last year, but as I say, there's a lot of good fundamentals in there for you. And then when asking, I did infer this earlier, that when asking permission from somebody to use a piece of music, or whatever you might be asking to use, again, do state kind of where you're using it, and you know, indeed how many times you're going to be using it. So you know, if I'm asking to be able to use a piece of music 100 times, it's very different from asking to only use it once, you know. So do state those kinds of things when you're asking for permission, and indeed, yeah, that you have the licenses for using the music, the tune and the lyrics. So just be clear with what you're wanting to use the piece of work for, and that will help them decide whether they want to grant permission to you or not. And then finally, is something that people do overlook, I suppose, and will become more of an issue / concern when as time goes on from now, is that with regards to the streaming license, for example, but it does apply to every license, it only applies to for the time that you've got that, the permission is only granted for the time you have that license. So for example, if you are live streaming your video, your worship onto YouTube, you're legitimately doing that because you've got your CCLI streaming license or streaming license plus, but then you stop paying for your streaming license or streaming license plus, those videos are then not permitted to remain on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. So they're only permitted to stay up there as well, for as long as you have that license in place. If you're always going to pay for it, then of course there's no problem there. But you know, lots of churches will have got the license for the purposes of COVID, but may stop having the license, in which case it's not permissible to leave that video on YouTube or Facebook or wherever. Great. I think that was everything I wanted to tell you all. I'm going to suggest, even just for my cold-ridden body, that we take a short break. so I can go and cough somewhere else. Yes, Joy.
Dan, there are a couple of questions in the chat, so I don't know if you want to take them now or when we come back before we start the next bit.
I thought we'll answer those when we with the rest. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we'll take a 10-minute break, folks. We'll come back at 2:30. Yep. Brilliant. Well, thank you for coming back. Full stop. I know it's not the easiest of topics to get to grips with. There are a couple of things, partly based on the questions that are already in the chat, and also just a couple of things I wanted to clarify about some of the things I said beforehand. One of it's with respect to the PRS for music question, in that yes, CCLI do have a PRS for music license. One side of the license covers performances of in a concert, so for you to have concerts held in your church, but again, bear in mind it's a weird technicality. I've never experienced it personally, but CCLI say that if you if your church hall, for example, is not attached to your church building, to your sanctuary, then you may need a separate license for that hall if you're having a performance in that hall. So just be aware of that. Again, don't know the technicalities of that, but and I will answer that YouTube question very shortly for you, Patrick, and indeed I think the answer will be beneficial for everyone. The other side of the PRS license is that you can play commercial music recordings on church premises. Unfortunately, as far as I can read, is that it doesn't cover streaming. So do be aware of that. Again, as far as I remember, PRS do have a kind of streaming style license, which is called the Limited Online Music License, the LOML. So do look into that. Again, it's not something I've looked into too deeply, because originally it was possibly going to be needed for just to do CCLI stuff, but actually CCLI have covered themselves now. But yeah, that's something to have a look at, because as I say, the PRS covers the CCLI one covers you to play kind of CDs or whatever in church during acts of worship, but it won't cover you for doing that same thing online. Similarly, the church video license, which is also available from CCLI, enables you to play film clips in church, but again, it will enable you to play a legitimate film clip in church, not just something that somebody's randomly pulled onto YouTube. That enables you to do that within an active work within a church building, but again, not necessarily online. So do just check that out. And the final thing I wanted to pick up on was, was about wing clips. And this applies to other websites as well, in that if you've got a website like that that's giving away, that has, you know, stuff either for free or stuff that you pay for, you know, you can pretty safely say that those things are legitimate to do, but it is just worth it might be worth clarifying with a company like Wing Clips. They're set, you know, because it says it's free to use in school, in church, or wherever. But again, we're not just using it in church, are we? We're putting it onto YouTube as well, if that's what you're talking about. So again, do just with, and as I say, this does apply across the board. When things say, oh, it's free, if they say it's free to use in church, it's likely that website was produced before COVID, when nobody live streamed their services, or very, very few. So do just watch out for those kinds of things. They may have given that permission assuming that it was going to be shown to 15 people on a Sunday morning rather than 100 people on YouTube. So it might be worth double checking those kinds of things. You know, they don't have a leg to stand on, obviously, because they've said it's free to use, but ultimately it's good practice, and indeed it's, you know, it's something that they may not have considered. Just scrolling back. So yeah, similarly with any kind of website, and I mentioned worship lyric videos as well, other websites where you can kind of buy videos or whatever, you know, you buy based on the terms and conditions they set, and so you may need to clarify with them. There are so many websites out there that couldn't possibly, there isn't a coverall for them, but do just check, basically. In terms of YouTube's, the way YouTube works with picking up copyrighted stuff, in that YouTube will, they do what's called a copyright claim. When you upload a piece of, well, when you upload a service or whatever you might upload, it will say it's got a copyright claim. And I'll just find an example on my, in fact, I'll show you I'll find one where there is. Basically though, folks, if you have, even if you have the legitimate licenses, YouTube may, well, because ultimately YouTube, just by scanning the video doesn't, and this is scanning it in terms of audially, it won't know whether you've got a CCLI license or not, obviously. So you may have to clarify that, but ultimately what happens is when you get a copyright claim, I'll just try and find one on my channel because I've had loads of them, and you know, I will say that because there, you know, it's I've had the correct licenses to do so. Say for example, actually, just on Saturday we held Yorkshire Synod. We live streamed Yorkshire Synod, and you can see here that it says we've got a copyright claim, but we had the relevant licenses for it. It said, but you see all, and it's kind of come off the screen a little bit, but it says your video is ineligible for monetization due to a copyright claim. All monetization means is if I wanted to put an ad in front of it, I couldn't, and this is where, you know, I'm sure you've seen it when you watch YouTube videos and an ad comes up at the start. I can't make money from that ad, basically. That's all that means when it says it's ineligible for monetization, and you know, I don't need to, so that's fine. And actually they're saying it's a copyright claim, as in I've used a piece of copyrighted music, but of course it was legitimate for me to use that music because we had a streaming license for Synod on Saturday. So you know, there is no problem there, and you will undoubtedly find that, but don't worry. You can dispute it if you want. You can say, you know, we've got a CCLI license, so there's no need for you to give us a copyright claim. And they eventually they may turn around and say yes. But again, if you imagine the number of, we talked about the number of hours that are uploaded. So then if you think around the number of copyright claims that must come up. And so if you email YouTube and say, you know, we've got this thing, then you know, it's probably going to take them a long time to get back to you folks, but I'm sure they will do eventually. But you know, don't worry about that. There are problems though, that sometimes, and this, I mean, it's certainly been a problem quite a lot on Facebook, where and Facebook have been a bit stricter at times with their copyright because and again, so if you play a piece of music that is within copyright, and Facebook's on a live stream, Facebook could suddenly just cut the live stream, because for them it's easier for them to just cut your live stream and have a slightly disgruntled church, you know, emailing them than, you know, Stuart Townend's publishers phoning them and saying you owe us £1,000 or whatever because you've allowed this piece of music to be played on Facebook. That's the logic I can see behind what they've done anyway, to try and maybe make people less angry when it does happen. But I you know, it's not ideal, and Facebook have stopped doing that as much now, I think. So it's not as much of a problem. But again, similar to YouTube, you are legitimate to have put your stuff on Facebook, on YouTube, because you've got the relevant licenses. So the best you can do is say, we have the relevant licenses, and then you kind of have to almost hope it doesn't happen again. It's unlikely to happen again if they've replied to you. But obviously, if they've not replied to you, then they could still be thinking you're putting up illegitimate stuff. So, as I say, unfortunately, there's no easy answer to it. But as I say, they are less likely now to cut the live stream or the video or whatever, but they will still say, oh, copyright claim. But again, if you know you're in the right, and hopefully after today you will know if you're in the right, then nothing to worry about. Verified YouTube channels. Yes, I've got a couple of examples here. One of which is a verified music channel. So if I hover over that, you see the little, it's really small, the little musical note there, a quaver, I remember. If I hover over the quaver, it says it's an official artist channel. So that's when it, in respect to music, it's a verified channel there. And then if it's just a verified channel, there's a blue tick next to the name of the channel. And when you go on any video, it will show that. Do bear in mind that you have to have over 100,000 subscribers to be verified. So there may be some Christian bands or whatever who just don't get to that level anyway. So they might still be legitimate, but are just not verified in YouTube's eyes. I'm not saying that it's the kind of Hoover vacuum cleaner thing, in that all verified channels are fine, but it doesn't mean that all unverified channels are not fine, if that makes sense. So again, if we use our principles of always checking, then we should be in a good place. Yes, Sarah, sorry about that. I did see your question about joint pastorates, etc. As far as I'm aware, certainly for starters, if you're holding worship within each individual church, then they each need an individual license for stuff that's going on in the building. From what I can gather, when it comes to streaming, you would be able to have one jointly. The best way to ensure that that's an okay thing to do is by using, say, the same YouTube account. So say one of your churches in the pastorate, Anytown United Reformed Church, gets the streaming license. You would then use Anytown URC's YouTube channel to live stream onto there. That would be my understanding of it. Again, of course, similarly with lots of other areas of church life, don't skimp out too much. In that, and just by the way, folks, the streaming license is based. And for those of you who have experience with buying a CCLI license, you'll know that the normal ones, in inverted commas, are based on your average congregation attendance. The streaming license is based on the average viewership online. So again, if you're advertising that to a lot more people, then you're going to have a larger viewership, so you're going to end up spending more money anyway. In the grand scheme of things, of the license, is not a huge amount more. Once you're already paying for a license, it's not a greater amount. So, but yeah, again, let's remember why copyright exists, folks. I mean, that I'm not saying that's a loophole that you found, Sarah. It's absolutely not. But there could be other avenues that people could go down to avoid paying for a copyright license. But and obviously that's not entirely why they exist. Roberta's question about reporting to PRS. I believe so. I don't have any experience of having done that, but I think that that works in a similar way to CCLI, yes, but it would be worth just getting in touch to clarify that. I will say as well, by the way, just in general, I found with PRS for Music and CCLI are very good at replying to emails. And as I said at the beginning, this is how I obtained my knowledge, is from endless email. And if they reply to me after the 15th email, then I think they'll reply to you after just one. So to all of you folks, do get in touch with CCLI or whoever you need to ask questions. That was not so that you don't ask me questions. Do feel free to ask any more now or indeed in the future. I think I've done the questions in the chat, but if I did miss one, please just shout. If anyone has any questions to ask verbally.
Hi, Dan. I think I just beat you to it, sorry. Before COVID, we just had a CCLI license at our church because that's all you needed. Our youth worker was playing Spotify videos in the service as part of let's talk about these things from a Christian perspective. Now, I presume he had a personal account with Spotify. So was he on slightly iffy ground there?
So, I mean, certainly applying the principles we've talked about today in terms of just because something's okay for personal use doesn't mean it's okay for commercial, then of course it could be iffy ground. However, thinking in the context of the streaming license plus, the streaming, and this is just for streaming, of course, but I'm just thinking laterally. The streaming license plus guarantees permission for Amazon Music, Apple Music, I think there was one other, but and CDs, MP3s, etc. But the one thing that CCLI said was it didn't necessarily guarantee Spotify, and so I emailed them and said, oh well, is Spotify okay? And they said you'll have to check the terms and conditions. So I dragged up the terms and conditions of Spotify, scrolled through them, and couldn't see anything that would suggest that I couldn't use Spotify with the streaming license plus. In the same vein, then, with what in CCLI's terms is called the PPL church license, which if you go onto the CCLI website is the one at the bottom. It says when combined with the PRS for Music license, it covers you to legally play music recordings on CD, MP3, I don't know what MP3 is nowadays, but it permits you to play it on MP3 and other formats on church premises. And again, it refers to that also not needing to be in just an act of worship as well. So because acts of worship do actually allow for, and in CCLI's terms, allow a lot more concessions than, because in a normal act of worship, you're permitted to play those things anyway, if you own them. But then, as I say, the waters are muddied in that something that you buy for your personal self is different from then playing it to everyone. But yeah, acts of worship allow a lot more concessions anyway than any other activity in your church, which is why why CCLI has additional licenses for things like being able to hold a concert in your church, because it's not the same thing basically. So yeah, I would suggest that is okay to do anyway, certainly in an act of worship, with the licenses that presuming that you have all of those licenses I mentioned, which most churches do. They just buy them all, but it might be worth just double checking that. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Janet.
Yeah, some of our churches use roots material with the young people, and we're often asked to show a clip from a film. What sort of permissions do we need for those?
So similar, streaming wise, it becomes a bit more of a grey area, but I would gather, and you know, as a youth worker myself, I probably wouldn't do that kind of thing on Zoom. So presuming that's in person, you would be covered to show a film clip. And again, probably goes without saying, but obtaining that, if you obtain that film clip legitimately, then you can show that as part of under the coverage of the church video license on that CCLI offer. So just to, I'll just quickly share my screen so you can see the one. And actually it refers very obviously to illustrate your teaching. You can see it covers all the big ones, Disney, Pixar, Paramount, etc. I mean, there's other things available like this screen view thing. I've not looked into that too much, but you can see here it does cover you in that respect. And you know, in youth clubs, outreach events, etc. So that would cover you for those things happening in person. Again, there's no clarity on whether that automatically means streaming. My gut feeling would say not. So again, that's why I was talking earlier about ensuring you get permissions for the specific activities you're doing. So, you know, I am live streaming this too. It does become a different thing.
Okay, thanks.
Marge, yes, I think you had a question, didn't you?
Questions, please.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier that to put our CCLI license number at the end of every hymn. Why? What we do in our church is to put it at the end of the PowerPoint, and I presume we also do a few hard copies for those who can't see the PowerPoint very clearly. Should we put it at the bottom of those paper copies?
Yes, you should. So it's a different license that that covers those things in terms of the I mean, as I say, everyone talks about having a CCLI license, but actually there's loads of little ones. But the license that permits you to print lyrics is different from displaying them, and indeed different from streaming as well. But yes, it's good practice to put them at the end of every hymn if you can, because it's good to have the details of the publisher and the artist, the person who's written that hymn as well at the end of each hymn.
I do that. I do the words. Yeah. I put the words on, who wrote the words, who wrote the music, and if there's copyright on either or I put that on as well at the end of each hymn. But I don't put our LCCI.
You should put your CCLI as well. Yeah.
Well, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as I say, for not directly addressing your question there, Marge, but for on YouTube, of course, if you're showing the lyrics as well and put them at the end of the hymn, it might put the copyright details at the end of the hymn, but it might just be worth as well dropping your CCLI license number into the video description as well. Just in case, just helps to kind of firm up the fact to YouTube that you have a CCLI license.
Okay, thank you.
I'll come to Jim and then I'll answer your question, Fleur, in the chat.
Okay, mine's a question and a comment. During the time when we weren't allowed to sing in church, which is fortunately no longer the case, we made a lot of use of Czech Valley Church's websites, not website, YouTube videos. I don't know if you've come across that one, but it covers the performance side of things, because it says on their website, which you can check, all of their YouTube videos are for the use of all churches everywhere. So provided it's CCLI licensed, we feel quite happy. We're not streaming, we're just projecting in church. Our current license covers that.
Perfect. That's really good to know, actually, Jim. Do you mind just popping the name of that again in the chat for us? That would be really useful
I'll
to
do
know, I
that.
think. Thank you.
Also, I was talking about the chat. Do people know how to save the chat, or is it going to be automatically saved?
Even if people don't know, it will be saved anyway, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, certainly a lot of what I've said today, Joy will be taking into account and putting in her magic booklet. So yeah, thank you, Jim. That's really helpful. Fleur, to answer your question, well, first of all, it depends if you're streaming or not. If you're not streaming, you would be covered by the, let me just remind myself the name again, the PPL and the PRS church licenses that are on CCLI's website. So if you have those already, then you will be covered. So that's the PPL and the PRS for music. So combining those together means that you'd be covered for playing CDs, etc. In church. If you're live streaming, you would need the streaming license plus. Yeah. To pick up on Sarah's point as well, that is incredibly useful to know. Thank you ever so much. I should have studied music.
Yes, it's very handy. He doesn't get involved in church, but he does listen to my meetings occasionally, so it's quite useful.
Well, of course, study, and again, this goes back to why copyright exists, because yeah, indeed, for someone who might want to become a professional musician, I don't know your son specifically, but for people who might want to become professional musicians, if they know that there is, I mean, becoming a musician is tough anyway, but
Yeah.
you know, getting the right credit for it is difficult, which is why copyright exists.
He's a drummer, but I can't get him to play in a worship band yet, but I'm praying for him.
Any other questions, folks? Just to say as well, to apply what Jim had said, you know, we don't have to, of course, indeed, in this case, Jim hasn't emailed Chet Valley churches for every single video he wants to use, because if they've given their express permission that all their YouTube videos can be used, it might be stating the obvious a bit, but that is their permission, so that's okay. That's all good.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, it's not a question, just a mention, are people aware that CCLI actually provides presentation software as well? It used to be called Worship Extreme, it's now called Presenter, and that ties in very nicely with Song Select as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Tony. Liam?
Hi there. It's just to let you know that I've been in touch with Chet Valley churches as well, and have been really helpful. Said exactly the same to me as well, and so have Eversham Music, and they do quite a lot. I know you were on about Singing the Faith before. They'll do quite a lot of hymns from Singing the Faith. So I found them really good as well.
And that's Eversham Music.
Eversham Music, yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good to know. Thanks, Liam. As I say, you know, all these things, all these kind of places for free music or whatever, you know, they're almost limitless. There's so many of them, and particularly in the last 18 months, so many people have given their stuff away for free. Talking of giving stuff away for free, the Taizé community actually, and I know I talked about one license before, but the Taizé community actually offered all of their content, all of their stuff for free use on live streams and stuff. But they'd said that it's during the COVID pandemic. So those are just those kinds of things to be aware of, that I mean, I don't know how they're defining the end of the pandemic, but you know, and at one point they had put a date on it. I think they'd said the end of June 2021, when obviously we all thought it would be fine by then. So those kinds of things, they're obviously great when they're applicable, but do bear in mind when and where they might stop being applicable. Similar to pick up on Leanne's point, if I contact someone and say, can I use this? And they say yes, that is very different than from another church. You know, if I say to another church, oh, well, I got permission for it, then that church does not have permission for it, folks. So do be, again, even if someone's really nice and lovely and saying, yeah, of course you can use it, they've given, you know, strictly speaking, they've given permission for you to use that piece of music or that performance or whatever, not everyone else. So you will need to make sure that your body, your church or whatever has permission from that. It as I say, you know, if they've said on their website or whatever, then you can use it, then of course you can. But yeah, do just be aware.